Welcome to page 91 of Anatomy Coloring Book. This is Dr. Stephen Harkins. And we have discussed briefly the autonomic nervous system, also known as the visceral nervous system. Why? Because the autonomic nervous system does not innervate muscles or skin, doesn't tell muscles to contract, your skeletal muscles to contract, or doesn't receive information from the skin, but rather the organs and glands of the body are known as the viscera. So the autonomic system is the visceral nervous system. There are two parts of the autonomic nervous system, and we will learn about the first part, the sympathetic division. And the next page will be the parasympathetic division. So let's talk about it. Where is the autonomic nervous system? Where is the sympathetic nervous system found? Well, in the area of the spinal cord from the thoracic area, T1, all the way down to L2. This is where the cell bodies of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic portion, arise. And you can see down here where from, not the dorsal horn, that's for sensory information, not the anterior horn, that's for motor information, but what is called the lateral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. So here we see spinal cord segments T1 to L2. Something unique about the sympathetic nervous system that's different than the other parts are these what are called ganglia. These little meeting places, these little bulbs on each side of the front of your vertebra. And these are called ganglia. They're sort of meeting places like train stations for the sympathetic nervous system. So these are called sympathetic ganglia, and they're connected. Each of these bulbs is connected by, so the ganglia are all connected by what is known as the sympathetic chain. All these little bulbs are connected above T1 and below L2 even. So the sympathetic chain runs all the way down, up and down the spine, whereas the lateral horn, whereas the preganglionic, whereas the areas of the lateral horn, where right over here, where they come from, the cell bodies are only located from T1 to L2. So it might look something like this. Some fibers might come out of, say, the T1 area and run and go to a ganglia, meet at ganglia, up all the way through the cervical spine, and then go out and innervate organs and glands of the neck. And down in L2, fibers might come out and meet in the ganglia in the sympathetic chain and run, say, downward and then outward to, say, some pelvic organs and glands. So to repeat, the lateral horn sympathetic cell bodies are located from T1 to L2, but that doesn't mean that the fibers, the autonomic, the sympathetic fibers, only innervate organs in this area. They travel up the sympathetic chain and down the sympathetic chain to reach your head and neck and arms, and your pelvic organs, abdominal organs, and legs. So, and here's an example right here. Here's the vertebra. right here. Here's the sympathetic chain running up and down the spine. And then there are fibers coming out to go innervate the organs. The fibers, here's the spinal cord right here. And here's an example of the fibers coming out of the lateral horn, the sympathetic fibers coming out of the lateral horn into the sympathetic chain, the ganglia, the prevertebral ganglia right here, prevertebral ganglia, sympathetic chain, and they go up and down and out to your organs and glands. Of course, what do they do when they get to your organs and glands? Well, the sympathetic nervous system is concerned with fight or flight. If a tiger jumps out from, if you're walking down the street and a tiger or an attacker comes out of the dark, what your body needs to prepare to defend itself, to fight, or to run, to flee. And so what does your sympathetic system do? Well, it gets your organs and glands and muscles and everywhere prepared to fight or flee. So your pupils of your eyes will open up, they'll dilate and get prepared so they can take in more visual information. They can see the tiger coming or the attacker coming. It increases your heart rate to pump blood and to your muscles to get ready to run or to fight. It increases your breathing rate so you have more oxygen. Increase blood flow to the brain so you're more aware. Your skeletal muscles, like I said, so you can run or punch or grab or kick. Well, what don't you need to do when a tiger or an attacker comes from around the corner? Well, you don't need to digest your food at that point. So the sphincter muscles of your intestines and your urinary system will close off, and your glands will stop secreting, your digestive glands. But your sweat glands will open up because your body's getting hot from all this activity of fighting and running that the body needs to cool off with sweat. So let's talk more specifically about the pathways of the preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. Well, pre means before, doesn't it? So preganglionic means before the ganglion. Remember, this is the ganglia here, running up and down in front of the vertebra here, or to the side and in front of the vertebra. So the ganglia is this right here. The chain is the ganglia. Sympathetic chain is the ganglia. So here it is right here, running all the way up and down the front of the spine. And so let's talk about where the neurons originate and the path to where they go. So here you see the cell body in the lateral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. And let's say you encounter an attacker coming around the corner. Well, this area is going to be stimulated. And so your body needs to be prepared. You need your sweat glands and your brain to receive blood, your skeletal muscles to receive blood, your sweat glands to open up, and your heart and respiratory rates to rise. So how does your nervous system tell your body to do that? Well, a message is sent from the lateral horn right here out of the lateral horn through the anterior ventral root. This is the motor root, where only impulses go only one way. Then come around and pass through the spinal nerve here, right? And from the spinal nerve, there is a special little pathway, a special little nerve, I guess, called the ramus, the white rami. Rami is plural for ramus, the white ramus. It branches off from the spinal nerve right here. Right here. There we go. It's this little structure right here is the white ramus. Little tube right here, carrying this preganglionic sympathetic fiber or neuron. Why is it called preganglionic? It's because it comes before. It's the neuron right here that is before it reaches the ganglion, so we call it preganglionic. Once it gets to the sympathetic chain, the ganglia, it has three options. It can travel down the sympathetic chain to another level, like we discussed up here. See? Down. It can travel and synapse, or it can travel up the sympathetic chain to synapse, or it can stay right at its own level of the sympathetic chain and synapse. What does it synapse with? Another neuron, of course, in the cell body of another neuron, which will then leave the sympathetic chain, the ganglia, and move outward to another nerve to affect some organ. Let's imagine that this is the stomach. And the area that it travels, by the way, recall that on the way in from the spinal nerve, that it entered the sympathetic chain through the white ramus, recall, a white ramus. Well, it exits the sympathetic chain back to the spinal nerve through the gray ramus. Right here. And on its way to its destination. This is called a postganglionic neuron. Why? Because it's comes out after it reaches the ganglia. So in blue here we have the preganglionic neuron and axon. And in green we have a postganglionic neuron. The axons of a postganglionic neuron. Let's follow the other path. Let's see of this preganglionic neuron in the middle level, which synapsed right here at the same level. Let's follow its postganglionic neuron through the gray ramus to the spinal nerve and out to its destination. Let's imagine that's the intestines. And of course, the intestines. Now, let's follow the path of the next lower level, assuming that it took route number 3 and went downward, down the chain. And here comes the postganglionic neuron after it synapsed with the preganglionic neuron. and leaving the gray rami, the gray ramus, and outward to its destination. Maybe that's the bladder, a sphincter in the bladder. Maybe it's telling the bladder sphincter to tighten up, the ureter, some urinary sphincters to tighten up so that you do not urinate while you are in fight or flight mode. And in fact, here's an example of exactly that. Here in number 4 over here. Here's an example of the cell body and the lateral horn getting stimulated. Why? Because you just saw a tiger. So a message comes down from the brain, from the visual stimulus of seeing a tiger. A message comes down from the brain and it stimulates this lateral horn. And a message gets sent, and it travels through the anterior horn. The preganglionic neuron is stimulated, and it travels through the spinal nerve and out through the white ramus, and then through reaching the ganglia. This is an explosion of right here. This is the ganglia, and through the ganglion synapses with a postganglionic neuron, and then outward to an organ, let's say your intestine, an abdominal viscera, viscus, telling it to stop functioning, for example. This is not, it's an inhibitory stimulus saying, stop, don't. Not time for digestion right now. We have to fight this lion. We have to fight this attacker. And it might send an inhibitory system saying, stop digestion of food and divert all our resources somewhere else. So let's define a couple terms here. Preganglionic cell body. Where would you find the preganglionic cell body? Of course, you know this already. You would of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic. You would find it right here in the lateral horn. Where would you find the postganglionic cell body? Well, right here in the sympathetic trunk, or the sympathetic chain, the sympathetic ganglia. These are all postganglionic cell bodies. Postganglionic cell bodies. A correction in number 4 here. This is actually not an explosion of this right here. This is a different kind of nerve. Some neurons go right past the sympathetic chain and right through it and do not synapse inside the trunk. And they head out to other ganglia, different ganglia outside of the sympathetic chain on the front. So this ganglia would be found on the abdominal wall, say here or here, and their synapse, the postganglionic neuron synapses out this way. These are called splanchnic nerves. The splanchnic nerve. So this is the splanchnic nerve. Here it is right here. The splanchnic nerve. Splanchnic nerve is outside of the sympathetic chain ganglia, the prevertebral ganglia.